Okay, is everyone settled now? Some people in the room might actually recognise Cara's voice. She was the voice in Beatrice Gibson's The Tiger's Mind that we screened last year up at the University of Leeds. And that was our introduction to Cara, actually. Not soon after that, we met up with her in Leeds, and she told us about two projects that she's been working on this year. One a new film work called Play, and that was commissioned by Picture This and exhibited at Spike Island in Bristol. And then also she was doing the Chisenhall Gallery Neighbourhood Residency programme in Victoria Park, and that was a year-long project. And I actually participated in that, and the culminating performance, Otium Fold. So that's what we're just having a catch-up about now, because Cara's going to show me the 3-minute trailer that she's just edited for the Chisenhall website.
Minus public heckling.
Yeah. Really, really brilliant project to be part of, and a really nice way to get to know an artist, I think, to actually participate in one of their projects in that way. So today we've seen, I'm going to have to read the title, One Must Force the Frozen Circumstances to Dance by Singing to them their own melody. And this is a reworking of two performances. The first one was Myriad Mouth Line, and the second, the end is a tumultuous noise, and you heard a pre-recorded connector between the two. So I'm going to start off the questioning and then open it up to you guys. My first question, Cara, is where does Myriad Mouth Line, what was the conceptual starting point for that?
Okay, so Myriad Mouth Line was a performance that I made for Freeze Art Fair. So it's a big art fair in London, and art fairs are kind of weird, gross places, but Freeze every year they do like a programme of artist projects and artist films. So I was asked to make a new performance for this sort of project as part of the art fair. And Sarah, who was the curator, she'd actually seen the that last performance I did just there, and so asked me to do that on the basis of that, and she asked me to make a new performance with my voice, and I think it's the most specific I've ever had a project put to me to be asked to do a performance with my voice specifically. So in one way I wanted to present both of them today because I felt like one of them really grew out of the other one, and they're both performances I think are covering sort of similar territory but in a slightly different way. So Myriad Mouth Line, which is the first one, so it's made for this really peculiar situation of being in an art fair. So one thing that was kind of really important to me was that I wasn't easily saleable, because in an art fair most people just go to, it's a big shop, it's a big trade fair. So it was kind of important to me that I didn't get too caught up into all that stuff. So I didn't want to have any props, and I wanted everything to be very kind of self-contained, so it could literally be kind of picked up and dropped anywhere. And I wanted to explore this idea of making a space with my voice, because everything in there is so material. I wanted to sort of explore this, marking out a space with just my voice, and if I was doing that I suppose that was kind of the starting point of the performance. And then the idea is that once you've marked out this space with your voice, well then what kind of space is that? What kind of space is a space that's made with singing rather than, concrete? So then the performance kind of evolved out of that. So every layer of the performance is like another kind of using a different mode of language and kind of building up the the construction of this fantastical space.
And in the end, as a tumultuous noise, you really get a strong sense of that growing of that space over time.
Yeah, it's more literal, I suppose, because you're getting it one on top of the other. So you're kind of getting more of a solid wall of sound coming at you that's built up over time. Whereas with Myriad Mouth Line, I guess it's much more, that there's those same sections are building up on top of each other, but they're not remaining in the space, you know.
So the end of A Tumultuous Noise, that came first, didn't it? That's the older of the two pieces. Yeah, and you did that with Isla, was it?
Yeah, so that was, it's funny with these two performances because they were both made for very particular situations, even though I've re-performed them quite a number of times since. Yeah, so that was a friend of mine, Isla, she's a curator, and she was asked to curate this programme of films and performances at the Tramway in Glasgow, and it was all to do with the work of Meredith Monk. So I don't know if you're familiar with Meredith Monk, but she's an artist, dancer, vocalist, works a lot with the voice. So Isla had kind of recently discovered Meredith Monk's work, and as a basis for this programme, she wanted to show some of her old films. And instead of kind of inviting people who make work that's similar to her, when she saw this work, she felt there was a number of people that came to mind straight away who she wanted to share this work with. So I was one of those people. So I guess the idea was really that it was like a shared excitement for the discovery of this work rather than trying to emulate the work or develop the work of Meredith Monk. So that was made for that. So actually the text was written first, and I knew I wanted there to be a performance, but originally I had this idea about having like projections and actors and all this kind of stuff, and then after I'd written the text it just felt like, I don't even know where to start with that, and it felt like the only part of the text that made sense as a performance was there's a part in the text that's a song that's sung by a number of characters in this story, and at the time I was quite interested in the idea of how you represent a lot of voices just using one voice, and that's the only part of the text that's spoken by more than one person, so that felt like the only bit that was right to kind of bring out of the text and physically represent in the performance. So that's what you're getting. Yeah.
So it's half text and half performance, that piece, isn't it? And it's a narrative text.
Yeah.
But then also it looks like one of these old concrete poems that someone would have made on their typewriter, like Vito Conci or someone. And there's all these kinds of directions and repetitions and dialogue in there. And I just wondered what specifically would you say the relationship is? Is it a score, would you say, or?
No, I don't know. It's funny because I made it such a long time ago, and in a way I feel like that piece of work really marks the beginning of a lot of investigations for me. So it was at a time when I hadn't really exhibited that much, and I think actually that performance after that kind of things took off a little bit more from that. So it's really like the beginning of an investigation for me. So I think it was before I'd really figured out how I knew I wanted to work with both of these things, but I hadn't quite figured out how they work together. And there was something that really excited me about like trying to deal with both of those things. So you have this text and you can kind of take this away, and then there's a performance and you have to try and like figure out how they balance and how they relate to one another or not. And so it's sort of that like discrepancy between physical action or physical representation and then, you know, a story which is much more ephemeral. So I think the sort of like awkward difficulty of that was something that excited me, but it was also something that kind of frustrated me about that performance, which is why when I came to make Myriad Mouthline I really wanted everything to be contained within the performance rather than it being these separate parts that I wasn't quite sure how to bring together. I think also there was something that frustrated me about there being all these bits of paper, so it's still a bit, I'm not entirely sure how those things meet, other than they're kind of born out of one another and they are connected, and I feel like I can't do the performance without the text or show the text without the performance.
And within the work itself, within both pieces there seems to be sort of a rehearsed programmed part, a choreographed part, and then an improvised part. What's the relationship between the rehearsed and the improvised in your works?
It really differs, I think, from work to work, but like the project that we were doing together, so we're working in a group, and a lot of it was really about improvisation. So I guess it's something that I've been using much more in a more direct way recently. Like what we were doing was really about exploring or creating this. I think because I was working with a group of other people, which was the first time that I'd done that, and it was the first time that I'd been kind of required to like teach something or, you know, kind of offer something in that kind of way. I felt like the only way that I could do that genuinely was just to create a space where people could explore what they wanted to explore, rather than me telling them I've got this, you know, all this like knowledge and experience that I can pass on to you, because it makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. So yeah, it was more about like facilitating a space for other people to explore stuff, and that's why improvisation was very useful in that instance. In terms of my own work, it's always like a balance. I mean, it's quite far from some kind of free improvisation. It's always very structured, and even the parts that are improvised within these two performances are like, they fit within a kind of predetermined structure. But I think for me the Myriad Mouth line has been easier to perform again because of those improvised parts, because I think if the performances that I've made that are very much predetermined, you can slip in, there's a danger that you slip into just kind of going through the motions of it, whereas I think when there's improvised sections, what can be amazing about improvisation is that it really forces you to be aware of being in the room, being in this space with an audience, and it makes you sort of acknowledge that the audience are there and think about it, and it makes you think about like the situation of today, like what's going on outside, what am I feeling, what I've been listening to that's sort of making me think about stuff, you know, like what physical things have been, you know, like movements and stuff have been really like exciting me or whatever recently. So then that, it always kind of evolves with you, and it evolves with how you're feeling about performance and maybe new things that you're evolving, whereas if it's very predetermined, then it tends to feel like, oh, but that was 3 years ago I was doing that, so it feels a bit weird to do it now. And I think that's the difference with performance, and that you're still having to do it. If you make a film or you do a drawing, you can re-exhibit it again and again, and although it feels a bit like, you might feel a bit disconnected from it, you don't have to physically embody it again. So I think the improvised parts really kind of help it evolve and keep feeling relevant for me to be.
Yeah, making it a specific event really, a specific encounter. And also I was going to ask you a question about your voice as an instrument in your work, and how you alternate between singing and speaking, a poetic voice and a very prosaic voice, I suppose. What is this alternation between different modes of language, I suppose? What does it mean?
I mean, the way people make their own languages is something that I'm really interested in anyway, and especially the way that like the rules that you live inside, or the spaces that you live inside, dictate the kind of language that you can use within that space. So that's something that I've always been really interested in anyway. So after making the Endless Tumultuous Noise, which was the second one I did, people would come up to me and say, oh, that was really nice, you've got a really nice voice, which is great. But at the same time I was a bit like, oh no, that's not what's important to it for it. It's not what's important about it for me. You know, I don't. It makes it into this kind of like aesthetic sort of surface thing that doesn't do enough for me for the work.
It's not critical enough.
Yeah, or something. I mean, it's fine and there's no problem with that at all. It's just, I think I needed something more from it. So, and also just generally in my video work as well, like I really kind of enjoy juxtapositioning like different modes of language. So whether it's like something that's very emotive, and then if you put it next to something that's very like logical and formal type of language, like bringing these two things together, it like makes you aware of how each of those modes of language is working or functioning, rather than just being able to slip into it and kind of get lost in the language of something. When you sort of, hopefully it kind of shocks you a bit to be like, okay, well, how is that working on me if you're bringing all these different kind of things together. For me, it's about kind of problematizing, if that's a word, making problems by bringing these things together, and creating questions by bringing these things together, and also just like an emotional feeling, you know, if you kind of start getting lost in one form of music or one form of language, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, here's a logical explanation to try and, there's something that excites me about kind of bringing these things together, you know.
Are there any questions to Cara from you guys? Jill?
I think you've touched on this already, Cara, but I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the kind of politics of the way that you mark out space. And I think that your work there's lots of fragility and vulnerability and also absurdity, and I just kind of wondered if you could reflect on what that does and the politics of it.
Yeah, so I mean, growing up in Glasgow, I went to art school up in Dundee actually, and then I moved back down to Glasgow afterwards, and I was on the committee of an artist-led space for a couple of years, Transmission, and like Glasgow, like Leeds, I think, is very much artist-led. So I think that kind of like doing things for yourself or doing things with really meagre facilities, you know, like you just do what you can with what you've got, and that's you know, that's the way you get things done. So for me, I think it's always been really important that I can say what I need to say with whatever means are available to me at that time, that I don't need like high production, and I don't need all these kind of mediating objects, even though like I've worked in other ways as well, but there's something really powerful to me about just really stark somebody in front of you just trying to figure something out with what you can. And this sort of delineation of space stuff is really about that. It's about like creating your own language for yourself, and that having its own politics, and it's about making your own space and being able to like be imaginative and be absurd and be vulnerable and be human within that space. So it's like, I think it's not about like removing yourself into a fantasy land. It's about like an empowerment of sorts, or and I suppose what excites me about art making is that it's like you're free to kind of use your own language to do things that don't really make sense, to say things that might be absurd, to say things that might be offensive, like to sort of mark out your own politics through your language. And that doesn't have to be about direct political statements, but that's about like an autonomy, I suppose, if that answers your question.
I have a question of salt. I don't need that, I think. Thanks.
No, I think it's more like, I've just got a really hoarse voice.
Yeah. What composers do you like or are affected by?
I hate this question.
Oh, right, okay.
But no, I don't mean that. Yeah, it's. I find it a really difficult thing to talk about because I think that influences and inspirations are a really personal thing, and I don't know, I have this like teenage itch where I get like, I don't want to be categorised by who I am interested in, and I think sometimes people, and I don't think it's the case here, but I think occasionally, like in interviews, I'll always refuse to answer that question because I feel like it's like a legitimising process, and in a fact, like it's a sort of a fashion thing. So if people go, "Oh, you're into that person," and also quite often people don't really say what they're into; they say what they think other people want them to be into, and but I mean, you know, like I listen to all sorts of stuff, like my partner is a drummer and he's kind of involved in improvised, experimental, like free jazz inclined stuff, so I listen to a lot of that with him. I listen to a lot of melodic music. My parents brought me up listening to like some classical music, yeah, techno, I don't know, like a lot of different stuff, but I find it really difficult to pinpoint those influences.
I suppose I'm quite interested in the way you describe architecture in terms of, you know, forming your own architectural space as a sound space that you build up through layers and then maybe pick it apart again in terms of your first piece and start to sort of interrogate it. I'm wondering also, like, do you seek out other spaces apart from like cube space? I know you talked about frieze as a way of articulating the space and almost like reforming it through that piece. But do you look at spaces outside, thinking about like the Susan Phillips piece, which we saw at Glasgow International a couple of years ago, underneath the bridge in the Clyde, and the song there that starts to also create more like a direct response with that space and talk about the history and the culture and the Scottish voice, which is really... So, you know, are you interested also in taking spaces or identifying spaces that you might have a different type of relationship with or reform rather than just the gallery space?
Yeah, I mean, up till this point I've just performed where I've been asked to perform, so, and increasingly that's a real mixture between the gallery space and like more music based stuff. So one of the next sort of things I've got coming up is a commission for a music festival, so which is nice actually. Like I like the kind of ambivalence of not like always performing in one space or the other, and also galleries are quite weird places to perform really actually. I mean, mostly, yeah, up until this point, when I'm marking out these spaces, they're very much like introspective interior spaces of my own invention, and I guess the point of that has been that they could really exist anywhere. And like in the film work I was making a while ago, I was making these sort of models of interiors quite a lot, and it's like this like I don't know, imaginary space to put the stuff rather than it being more like a real life space. But in saying that, like the most recent thing, the thing that Linzi was talking about, it was a performance commission for Inside a Park. So that was the first time I'd really had to deal with a real space, and it was hard work. You know, like it's messy, yeah, totally. And then on the day, you know, up to 10 minutes before the performance, it looked like it was going to rain, and the performance was 3 hours long. So I was like, I can't ask people to sit in the rain for 3 hours. That's just not plausible. And then we got this drunken guy heckling us really aggressively. Got like a full sort of class art critique all just within the first 20 minutes, and all we were doing was walking slowly. So that was really good. So, you know, like Yeah, I mean, I really and I really enjoyed the messiness of that, but it's a totally different thing because I think these sort of spaces that I was making were like super controlled and kind of psychological spaces rather, like fantastical theory spaces rather than real life spaces. So yeah, it's been kind of interesting, like you make these things and then you get asked to do stuff that's really not what you would maybe choose to do, and that I think is exciting because it really pushes you to, just out of your comfort zone, I guess. But I just wanted to say thanks also for having me, and thanks everybody for coming, and it's been really nice to work with you.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Cara.
Oh, thank you.